All right, welcome to Now This is Podcasting. I'm Connor, and I'm here as always with Calvin.
Hello.
And we have Katya with us again.
Hello.
And we're talking about Men. This just came out. This is an educational film about the beauty of childbirth. And it features an amazing cast. We have Rory Kinnear, Jessica Buckley, Rory Kinnear, Papa Asidu, Rory Kinnear, Gayla Rankin, and Rory Kinnear. Also, big shout out to Laura's Horror Sounds. That's where we got the music for this. We just found her page on YouTube, and it was like, hey, you're welcome to use this. Just make sure you credit me. So we're going to credit her just in podcast, and then we'll also put a link to her video and the song that we ended up using in this review. So thanks again to Laura's Horror Sounds. So this is an A24 film that we saw the trailer for, and obviously we're interested. I think, what movie did... I can't remember what movie we were in when we saw it, but it was like, it really grabbed us. It looks like this really creepy kind of thriller horror. And I think it definitely captures that.
Definitely delivered.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this was directed by Alexander Garland. He did Ex Machina in 2015 and Annihilation in 2018. Annihilation's like one of my favorites. I know Calvin doesn't love it, but I really like this director a lot. He also wrote this, and he wrote Ex Machina and Annihilation, so he's like totally involved in this. I'm not sure if this is the right budget because it was really hard to look up anything for this, because if you type in men, it brings up a lot of different results. So.
It's impossible to find any credible source or anything on subject.
I know I typed in men budget, and it was like how to budget men for outfits and stuff. I was like, oh God.
And it was like X-Men franchise.
Yeah, a lot of that. So the budget I found was $15 million, which it has like a pretty substantial visual effects shot at the end.
There's a lot of visual effects, actually. Even like the dandelion, that was visual effects.
Oh, right. So a $15 million budget on this seems like kind of more modest than what I was expecting. And it's only an hour and 40 minutes. All of his movies have been around an hour 40, which is good because I don't think this movie could have gone on much longer for me.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about kind of the pacing and the setup and some of the aesthetic and why I think it feeds into why I thought part of this movie was a little boring. But yeah, we can get more into that. Katya, what was your first impression of this film?
My first impression. Is it too early to talk about vaginas?
This is a spoiler review. There's no way to talk about this movie without spoiling it. So whenever you want to talk about vaginas, go for it.
I think that's all I needed to say.
Right. I love that just some studio executive had to read the screenplay for this to greenlight it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there has to be like some storyboarding done and explaining like, this is how I want my climax to be. And some studio executive had to like okay the budget for a movie that has like 4 CGI vaginas at the end. I think it's great.
Yeah. Oh, and no boobs.
Yeah, no boobs. But that's also what's so crazy. Like I don't know if I've ever seen a vagina on screen that isn't foreign, because that's an instant NC-17.
Right.
So I guess that's how they got around this, because it's on a dude's back.
Well,
yeah.
It's not like a real vagina, but we're gonna give it all of the parts.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
It was part of the movie I wasn't expecting, for sure.
Oh no, I was sure after the first one, I certainly wasn't expecting more, and then just kept going. Yeah, we'll get into why.
Yeah.
I guess.
So but aside from that, because that's what you leave the theater with, it's just that fresh in your mind. For the most of the movie, I thought it was going to maybe be kind of this beautiful tragedy of grief and trauma and coming to terms with it and maybe getting to a resolution, but I didn't really feel much resolution. I didn't feel much climax, and so
because it wasn't for you.
It wasn't for me. Like, yeah, who was it for? Like, the female character wasn't super interesting, but I loved the visuals. I felt very calm watching all the nature shots as they went, and then I felt very uprooted at the end and a little lost. That's my take.
All right. Cal, what do you think of this?
Yeah, I would describe this film's style as the beating of a dead horse that's been birthed by 4 other dead horses.
Okay.
And are all men.
That's great.
Yeah, I it's just like eventually, like how you set everything up in this air of mystery and symbolic and thematic nature. Like it felt like finally Alex Garland was going to make like an intelligent film. And
oh man, that hurts me because I love his other 2 movies.
The thing is like he is just given over to the sensationalism of subtlety. He has all of these little clues and things that smart directors can put in their movies and be like, that's the point. But I can also say other things. But he's also like, guess what? That thing you saw, it was the point. Yeah. And I'm going to say it about 3 more times. What's the point? Yeah. I don't know if you missed that. We're going to do one more birth shot to make sure you understand that that's the point.
I certainly agree with that. I think his other 2 films kind of have a similar sort of problem where it feels like the end just kind of keeps going. Mm-hmm. Like, while I said I really like Annihilation, but there's that scene with Natalie Portman kind of squaring off with her doppelganger at the end.
Yeah.
And it kind of just goes on for too long. It's like, we've already got the point. Just kind of move the scene along. So his films kind of struggle with that. I mean, if you see that as a negative, I thought they kind of worked in his movies. I do think this one is a little gratuitous ending. Mm-hmm. But before we get more to the ending, a brief synopsis on this film. It's woman enjoys tea while struggling to play piano and has an unexpected guest.
Yeah.
is the bare bones kind of synopsis of this. This woman goes to the countryside dealing with the death of her ex-husband. Well, I suppose she's widowed, not really an ex-husband.
Her near ex-husband. Yeah,
you get some more information on that, and the way the trailer set it up, it sort of seemed more like a tragedy, or maybe a murder mystery. Like, you don't know how the husband died.
Or a dream.
Yeah.
Because that was what was interesting about him following and them looking at each other. I think it makes sense the way that she describes it as not necessarily being a suicide, because if he's trying to climb down,
right,
then he would be turned that way.
Yeah.
So
I just thought I was surprised to find out that their marriage had been struggling and she was going to get a divorce. I thought this is like one of the first times the trailer didn't like ruin the movie for me, I think. Mm-hmm. First time in a long time, whereas like I was suspecting like, oh, is she going away to this cottage to get away because she's tired of police investigations and not knowing the truth about what happened to her husband, and it turns out to be a bit explicit on like kind of what happened, or at least the moments leading up to his death. But yeah, so she escapes to this cottage, and then over time she runs into Rory Kinnear's character and his other character and his other character, and just more creepy things keep building up. And so that's kind of a brief overview of what this film is.
Yeah, and speaking of the trailer, I think this is the first time that an A24 film undersold what we were going to get.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be some sort of mystery, Little Red Riding Hood, Pan's Labyrinth, countryside.
Yeah, psychological, definitely.
Yeah, or like no point at all.
It was
and
much.
And this last week, I've been like, every time I go like look something up on YouTube, I'm like blasted with a Men trailer.
Really?
Yeah, this had trailers everywhere. I thought which surprised me because we saw Everything Everywhere All at Once, and that didn't seem to have a lot of like build up to it.
I was blasted with trailers.
Then I wonder what maybe my algorithm is just different than yours.
Maybe I have Asian ancestry and I'm on some list somewhere.
But I feel like I didn't know a ton about that movie, but I feel like I definitely knew this was coming out. It felt like it was ramped up a lot more than other A24. Like Green Knight, I didn't think got a lot of trailers.
Yeah, and I have a hard time knowing for sure because I live in kind of a social media bubble. So all I really see are like ads for whatever last thing I clicked on, which happens to be Switch Sports. So
you brought this up, I think, last time we recorded.
It's still going on. I already bought it. This worked already. I don't need to give me the DLC, and maybe then I'll stop seeing these.
I still get ads for PureFlix from the time that my roommate kept talking about Christian Netflix. I still get PureFlix ads.
I don't even know what that is.
You should, apparently.
It creeped me out one time. I was working with Jaden, and I was just saying like, oh, I think I'm going to get an Instapot. Like my sister-in-law has one, they love it. And I kid you not, like the next day I like looked up Amazon and it was like an ad for Instapot. Mm-hmm. And I was like, dude, that creeps me out so much. Like now I don't want it. And then I bought one. And it's great. I love it.
And it works. This is creepy, but I see why they do it.
So I kind of want to move into like some of the aesthetic and the pacing. You guys text me because we didn't see this together. We've gone see most of these in the theater together. I had a little things come up, and so I saw it earlier today, and you guys were texting me last night after you had seen it. You're like, it's lovely. And you meant in terms of like kind of like shot selection and aesthetic for what I would say for like 2/3 of this movie is like really just, it's a lot of like, I describe them as like ambient shots, like just shots of the woods, droplets trickling into a puddle. dandelion seeds blowing off in the wind. And it's like this like setup montage, and he's done that in all of his movies. I mean, I just think for me the problem was the subject matter is not interesting. In Ex Machina, you get this like really slick modern building in the middle of the woods, but having those two things contrast each other just like inherently makes the shot more interesting. And I think they kind of stand alone a lot better. In Annihilation, you have kind of nature creeping up on modern buildings, and you have really weird sci-fi fantastic elements that like crystalline trees and stuff, and the shots just seem in those montages to stand on their own better, where in this it's just like it's the woods. I get it. I feel like you could scroll through Instagram and see the same photos taken with an iPhone with like the same composition. So maybe it's just a personal problem, but I felt like it was a little gratuitous.
It's one of your many personal problems.
I just thought shots of the woods were a little too gratuitous, and they didn't seem to add anything or do anything.
So yeah, that would be my main premise is why this is a personal problem.
We're going to find out. I'm going to find out like tomorrow. Like everyone loved it.
But yeah, I disagree. I think that those things are interesting in terms of photography only. The actual subject matter of them I don't think is inherently interesting as it relates to symbolic and thematic ideas of the central film. Whereas here, it's such a big deal. Like you're getting into the countryside, you're away from everything. Mm-hmm. It's new life, it's rebirth, which is all kind of wrapped up into the Green Man symbol, which is what that mask thing is on the podium.
All I thought was the Green Knight this whole time. I was like, when is the Green Knight going to show up?
He's actually an iteration of the Green Man.
Really?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, not necessarily. The Green Man is just like this big primordial image that literally doesn't mean anything anymore because it is so borrowed and traded that they think it's from like 2nd century like Asia. The Green Man is so old that it really doesn't mean anything. So it's just taken to be like fertility, virility.
Life.
It's always men. So
Guardian.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the best depiction of it is Charlie Day from It's Always Sunny when he is dressed as the Green Man. I think that's the most accurate representation we've gotten of that.
That's going to be studied by archaeologists.
Yeah, you've got to think though, right? Like
Oh yeah, for sure. But I think that's why all of these things work together is because like even the dandelions and the seeds, like that is also an idea of men spreading their seed and the apples and virility. And it's like, oh, it could go on about all of the pretensions behind it, which, I mean, Alex Garland certainly loves, and he's not subtle about them. But that's what I love about the first half of this movie, or first third, if you really think about it. Like everything in the countryside is subtly setting up a place away from men, away from other people, so that she can work on herself, she can grow, and she can regrow. But the idea of like the dandelion seeds getting in the way,
they get in the
her.
way.
So that's why I would call it lovely, is because I think that if you look at it as as someone trying to recover from an abusive relationship, it's all things symbolic and beautiful and wonderful, and it contrasts so well with all of the gratuitous, unnecessary gore. With the end of the movie?
I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it because he does the same thing in Annihilation. There's like really weird body horror in it. There's like a man splattered, his skeleton's like splattered in a pool, and it's like growing barnacles and stuff out of it. Like but I think that shot's more interesting than, it's certainly more interesting than watching a man birth another man for I enjoyed the composition of that shot more, and it was really eerie and creepy, where this was just like, we're still going.
What about the dead deer though? Because you had like so much space and nature, and then you have like this dead decomposing deer, which I guess could also be rebirth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it was
exactly.
also kind of weird
because it's giving life to the maggots.
Yeah, and the forest floor, and it zoomed into its eyeball like it was another vagina. I think that was the first
I'm sure that
vagina.
Yeah. Well, no,
saw.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like that's another thing, like the tunnel, being.
That's more what I thought it was. But I guess those all. It feels like we talk a lot about objects and stuff, things representing phalluses.
Yeah.
So this movie really turned that on its head.
There weren't a lot of phalluses.
There was a knife. He talked about that.
When I thought the key was a phallus.
The key is also a phallus.
God.
Don't worry. We're not going to get through a movie without a
Lord.
phallus.
Yeah.
Especially when it's written and directed by a man. There's phalluses everywhere.
Yeah.
even though we're talking about slits and like openings and like doors and like
Caves. And
yeah,
stuff.
caves, yeah. There's plenty of vaginas because phalluses are concerned with vaginas.
For
Wait,
sure.
did she ever take a bath?
Yeah.
She did?
Yeah, she gets on the phone with her friend.
Oh, yeah,
Or she
okay.
texts her friend. No, it's when she zooms in on the photo
Yeah,
of.
that's when she sees him naked,
the naked
in the
man.
bath. Okay, cool. Sorry. Brain fart. I was like, why wouldn't she take a bath?
No, I guess the way you guys are explaining it makes me think the montages matter a little more. But it's just I just found them wholly uninteresting in like what we're looking at. I was just like, it just felt like he's done better stuff in his other movies where, I don't know.
And that's why I loved it. It was because it was like finally he's not being so sensational. He's being very subtle. It's very simple. These are super saturated images of the fields, of the trees. There's all of this just wonderful. It's like I was just thinking about how like we go outside and we have like brown grass. And like, we have conifers and stuff, but everything around them is just dirt. So like it's cool to see like moss. The idea of moss is cool.
Oh,
when,
yeah.
when you live in the desert.
Yeah, I loved it because it was like, oh, there's England. It's so wet and fresh. There's so much, and then it's like showing all this space. And for me, like, that was some of the like, I don't know, most saturated, high definition stuff I've seen.
Oh yeah,
on
I think
a theater screen.
The greens turned up to 11.
Yeah, I was like, that's
yeah.
cool. And sometimes it would zoom in on different spots. Like you were outside and you'd look at one flower and then another flower. And I was like, oh, am I doing that? Or is the camera just, focusing on different flowers or whatever? So.
But I do know what you mean. It certainly went on longer than I would have expected. Certainly how he's paced his other films, it went on longer than expected because if you think of like the first thirds of those, like Annihilation spends a lot of time building up their team. And like setting the stage for their characters, and there's just nothing interesting to see there. So that's part of it. But it's all building up the relationships, which is a little bit more interesting. And same thing with Ex Machina. There's like a lot of visions or like images of the compound and everything, but there's a lot of voiceover. And I think that carries through your interest. Whereas here we just get to see things. Yeah. Which is why I thought he put it all together.
Yeah, I guess it's just like a personal preference thing because I apparently like the over the top because I don't even think it's that over the top. I just think it's like interesting filmmaking. And this, like I said, just compared to his other movies, I was like, oh, hey, you took a step back and you made a more boring movie. I thought the first 2/3 of this movie were actually kind of boring. Mm-hmm. And I think there are like interesting set pieces that take place in each act, but as a whole, I was kind of like, okay, I'm ready for the movie to start now. And that was sort of my problem again with the sort of montages. But I want to know now, what do you guys think of the score? I love his movies. Always seem to have a really unique sound to them. They certainly don't go off of like Marvel movie epic thing. They're not orchestral. It doesn't follow any like convention. It always seems like they have a really unique sound, and I wanted to know what you guys think of that.
Yeah, I dug it. Seemed super tribal. I like all the tribal kind of
very folky.
Yeah, folky. Drums. I loved how loud some things were and her screaming and everything. So I really liked some of those parts.
There's a great part when she's in the church screaming and like whatever note is being played along with the score is like it's like the same note along with it. And it just like really amps it up. I like that part a lot. I like how it seems to rely on voices a lot. You have like choirs, like you said, like tribal, there's chanting. It sounds like maybe there's like some throat music, or at the very end I think is like kind of where the score like really hits its high point. It's this weird kind of reverberating human sound, and it through the speakers it moves from like right to left and left to right, and it kind of it was like off kilter as the scene is, and so I like how the sound seemed to match all it really well. And again, it was just a really unique sound because I thought Ex Machina and especially Annihilation had like really unique scores to them. So I was glad he kept like that part of his filmmaking in it because it all tied in really well.
Yeah, and we've talked before about like Johan Johansson and who else? I'm drawing a blank now, but that idea of holy minimalism,
right?
That's used for like a lot of
opposite of Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it's still like
Johan Johansson did Arrival, right?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. It did Arrival. So if you've seen Arrival, that's the type of thing I'm talking about. They can be big and they can be bombastic, but they also have these valleys of emptiness, and that's really the minimalism here. It's not used very often. It feels like for these more intimate settings, but I think it works better for movies like this because it creates a sound of nuance around something that we just we don't know what's going on, and it's perfect for that environment. So I love how we mixed like a lot of like what felt like a lot of Celtic imagery and things. Maybe that's just my dumb Yankee brain over here, like not understanding like English countryside and English churches. But I feel like there's a lot of Catholic inspired imagery.
Oh, for sure.
Maybe that's Protestantism as well. That's just left over, but old Catholicism and old Protestantism, they're not like our old church annex basement.
Oh God, yeah.
Where we have the heaters on the side of the walls, and maybe we have a couple windows. Like those are our churches, so those all look the same to us. So how they took the kind of chamber music that comes out of church music as well, and then put that into the score. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, and it makes it hard to tell. Like when she was in the church, I remember being in multiple churches, like in England and Europe, when all of a sudden music just starts playing and there's someone up, like there's just a choir playing, or there's someone that jumps on the organ and they're playing. Like it's just that time of day when it's time to play music. It's time to
they just
remember God.
People in the town, they're like, all right, boys, it's time to do church music.
Like a lot of times,
time to remember God. That's great.
Time to remember him. Yeah, time to remember God. And a lot of times, people would be in there, hanging out and listening. But sometimes in smaller churches, there wasn't anyone in there.
Right. I liked, I think probably one of my favorite parts is the reusing of her like echoing like that, just her own sounds. It appears later on as like non-diegetic sound. It's just kind of over, again, this kind of montage of shots of fields and forests and stuff. So I liked how that got re-added in.
You mean is the symbol of the echo?
Yes.
Is that what you want to talk about? I'm just kidding.
But I also wish that they should have used, or not should have, I would have liked to add more sounds that we had heard earlier in the film reintroduced into the score. So I thought maybe the part of the piano playing that she messed up, add the beginning of that, and then add more wonky piano playing after that. Because it's like, it just felt like it made it more personal, it made it more about this character, which I think part of our problem is the movie doesn't really seem to be about the main character in it.
Not really, yeah.
Yeah, she's really more of an archetype. Another sound that they could have brought in too would be when a FaceTime call gets connected. That kind of sound. That would have been fun to play around with too.
Cool.
I mean, when you're a student on a budget, you have to think about things like that.
Call my phone. Do 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 do.
All right, now I'm going to play with that, and that is my score.
Right.
Exactly. Just keep calling my phone.
That's how I felt we're all going to the World's Fair was. I mean, because you hear the Skype sound and her ringtones and stuff go off. They felt like they were, I mean, not necessarily a score, but they all were like sounds that like helped push the story along. So I kind of like the idea of that.
So let's get into like now, like what makes this movie weird? I think there's a lot of stuff that we can talk about, like why this movie is open to interpretations. Like I saw like article headlines like this is a movie with a lot of questions and no answers. So let's start with Jeffrey, because obviously there's multiple interpretations you can come away with what Jeffrey is, what Jeffrey does, what Jeffrey means. But from a physical sense, was Jeffrey a real person at any point for you in this movie? Or was he always this creature?
So I think he's real in the sense that Harper drives to a place in the country. She meets a landlord who's like kind of a bit of a character, like she says. A little awkward, and then he goes home, and then it's fine. Beyond that, I don't think maybe he's the only one who actually looks like Rory Kinnear. Maybe. But beyond that, I don't think anyone is like especially real in this movie. I think this movie is almost all psychological, because if it's a real creature or some kind of demon or something like that, then she would notice over time that, okay, everyone looks like the same person in this town. Like that would become obvious if that was the point of this movie. And that's why I don't think it's that it's all the same guy or everyone looks the same. I think it's this projection that she has of men now and how she views them as like they're all manipulative. They're all going to blame her. Like they are all the victim and they're all predators. And Jeffrey just is also just another man that she views that way.
Yeah. I thought he was real. I thought the first person she met was real. And it took me a while to figure out, like, I saw the CGI boy's face. I was like, well, that's very strange. And I don't understand why it's like that. But it did take me until, like, the bar scene where I'm like, oh, they really do all look really weirdly alike. And I was just like, how do they find all these people that look so similar? Because they were like slightly enough different, right? Like,
Right.
I was like, maybe they're not the same exact.
You're experiencing movie magic. You know?
Yeah,
Like,
I had so much movie magic in this movie. Good grief.
Yeah, it's Octomom's kids all grown up.
Oh my gosh.
well, and that's kind of one thing I wish would have been hidden from the trailer, because I mean, maybe I watched a different one than you, maybe a more extended one, but they show like the bar scene, and they show the policeman, and they show the naked man, the green man, and they all have Rory Kinnear's face.
Yeah,
so.
I didn't see that. I remember just seeing like the
tunnel one?
and the echo.
I wish I would have
Yeah.
just seen that trailer, but
Yeah.
again, I just got
It's like, what is
blasted
this
with
about?
trailers.
Oh, I guess we saw the vicar though. So yeah, I guess I would kind of agree with Connor. Like, I think she saw him, and then that just kind of got projected on all these people. Like, she's had this. She's also fresh out of this super traumatic experience where she feels so much guilt. There also might just be this sense of, well, I'm not really going to identify anybody in particular in this village, because like that's not what I'm here for. I'm not here to interact with them. They just keep kind of pushing into her way. So there's no really reason for her to have them be different people. For her, they're all the same. They all happen to be this creepy guy who is all these things. He's this weird old landlord. He's this mentally unstable little boy. He's this super sexual vicar, this like kind of macho policeman, and a
Yeah.
seemingly nice bartender.
Yeah.
He's kind of the only one I'm like, he basically just mumbles all of his lines.
Or like the guys.
Yeah. He's like, no, I insist, I'll pay for it. And he's like, whatever, man. Like,
But like, there's also those guys in the background that just like got in a fight or something. Those I didn't get those people.
well, I think they just look to be, I mean, they look to be like glaring at her and like, I
Yeah,
don't know.
they
I
were
think
very menacing.
I think the implication is like like sexualizing her in their head. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd like a piece of that or something like that. They're very menacing in the way they look. And I think that you can tell there's some malintent there. And I think that's just the whole point, is that's how she views all men now. Like they're all out to get her in some way because she came from this really traumatic relationship with her husband earlier.
And it's interesting because she never like what a great, again, like England, what a great place to set like a horror film, because everyone's just cozy. Like, she's got her cozy sweaters. She's never like overtly like unclothed or suggestive at all.
No.
She's just this like kind of regular middle-aged woman in her dress that she wears every day and her hiking boots.
Which everyone knows. That's how a good horror story starts. Regular lady in modest clothing.
Yeah, so
Sure, she'll live to the end.
Yes.
she I think she did.
Yeah. But I think that when I first watched it, I thought that he was all the same. I think it was a creature the whole time. And I don't think that he was real at all, because it was just building up all of these things of like the pub is over there. He knew like that she was at the church. Suggesting there that like if Jeffrey was a real person, like he would have been continued until he got back to the house at the end of the movie, right? So that second time where he's at the bar, I think that you could say that was also the real Jeffrey, and everybody else just looks like him. But I think everything was that what there was connected, because it was just this idea of the Green Man, and it was a part of her journey.
So you think that she like went into this Green Man bubble and like this demon had control over her reality?
Yeah, exactly. I don't even know if it was a demon. I think that there's some
They
seeming
prefer the term
malcontent.
entity.
Entity?
But I think there's some seeming malcontent, but it seems like the Green Man, like when he is like as he's like covered himself in cuts and foliage, he's some sort of like kind of benevolent spirit that wants to guide her on some sort of awakening. Like when Jeffrey disappears on the lawn and reappears, and he's there and he blows the dandelions in her face and, you know, impregnates her with the dandelion spore. And she just goes back inside and
She's
closes
like
the door.
super acceptance at that
Yeah.
point. And then, yeah.
So I think that the entire thing was just the one creature. So, but follow-up question then, would it have been better, wonderful performance all around by Rory Kinnear. Would it have been better if they were all played by different people though?
That's not the point of the movie, Calvin.
And that's why I just keep going back to like, she must just view all men the same now. Like it doesn't matter if you're a priest. It doesn't matter if you're a bartender. It doesn't matter if you're the landlord. It doesn't matter if you're a kid. I mean, yeah, I'm sure in her head I thought the point of having the kid there and having the same face was like, this kid is going to grow up to hurt women and make all of his problems that he has, blame a woman for that. I thought that was kind of, otherwise I don't know what the point is of having them all be Rory Kinnear.
Yeah.
No one actually, I guess they freaked her out, but no one actually ever hurt her. Like there was a point where you're like, no one's going to hurt her.
Which is kind of why I agree with Calvin, where it being, I like that you said, like this benevolent entity where it's just like, it's guiding her on a journey in the creepiest way it possibly can.
It's forcing her to look at the dark parts of her mind.
Yeah.
Like this is all psychological expression, and it's all this amalgam of primordial images of man and of her concept of what man is. And that's what it's forcing her to look at. But I think that there are better ways to, and this is why I say, like at the beginning, like it's beating a dead horse that's birthed by four other dead horses. Like when you make it the same guy, you're continuing the same metaphor throughout the entire movie. You don't need anything else on top of it. So really, if you wanted to make a more subtle movie, you cast all of those people, all of those characters as different people, and you tie them together, like with the fingernails, with the cuts.
Right.
There are other visual ways to represent that this is the same thing moving around, and it's not like literally like, oh look, that dude's definitely the same, because it's also something that would get spoiled in credits. You wouldn't even be able to hide it, because it would just be obvious, because that's how the credits are.
That's why I had no idea why they made any effort to do the nail or the cuts and stuff, because you already knew they were the same person. So I was really, it seemed, super overkill. Unless there was some hidden meaning.
I don't think this movie is very hidden in its message.
We'll get to the birthing scene. I think I've come up with something to save this. You're welcome, Alex. I know. I'm pumping my own self up, and I think that like there's a smart way to say everything that he's doing, and it's the least obvious thing in his entire movie, which is the problem.
I don't know. To me, it's still. I think it works your way, where it's like some kind of entity, and I think it also works if it's just all in her head, and like this is just her vision of men now. And I think the movie, the ending, which we'll get to, is like her way of working through it, whether it's a spirit that's helping her or an entity that's helping her with it, or if it's her own like fortitude in overcoming it herself, like mentally. I think it works either way.
Yeah.
But it certainly makes it for a good movie to talk about, because it is. It's like, it's not explained why they all look the same. And the fact that she totally ignores why they all look the same keeps you wondering, like, okay, well, what's really going on here?
Yeah. And I think that if you wanted to say that Jeffrey was a real person the whole time, the moment that the creature is awakened is in the tunnel. And that thing, because, tunnels are, a Freudian, Jungian symbol of vaginas and birth. And like, I mean, like, I feel like we've been on the Jung train this whole time. I don't know how you can talk about knives and slits and not be talking about Freud and Jung.
Carl Jung, yeah.
But so I think that like that was something that was, but I think that was something that was literally birthed out of her mind when she went into the tunnel, which is why it echoes in such a weird way, because it's all going on inside of her mind, and it's just a representation of her mental landscape. So that thing then follows her home, because it knows where she is, because it is her. That's the whole point. Is it's a mental projection of what's tied up inside of her mind, and she has these weird ideas of men now because she's just so hurt and broken.
Right. No, I agree with that. That's a good question, because I think it kind of wraps up or talks about the themes of the movie. Like, what are we even watching?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but also, why was who was the guy at the end of the tunnel then? Because he had clothes on.
Yeah, the guy in the tunnel is not the naked man, unless the naked man, he could always take his clothes off, I suppose. But
yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I think it's just so up to interpretation, and she might just be envisioning a guy with clothes, because that's terrifying. Someone fully clothed running at you, and then there's a different but there's a different type of terror when there's just a naked man standing there stalking you.
Right.
And I think it's the juxtaposition of what different threat each of those bodies pose.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is interesting. There's like a lot of different threat levels throughout this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like the vicar with his, like the most uncomfortable parts are like the guy when he puts his hand on her knee. Like that was really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like more so than him just full on, manhandling her. More so, I think, than just seeing the naked guy in the woods. But once they get closer and like it's just interesting to see which things make me the most uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Like is it the policeman ignoring you? Is it the naked guy just kind of curiously hanging out in your garden?
Yeah, exactly. Is it Jeffrey being like,
when did you lose your virginity?
Yeah.
I didn't lose it.
Okay, so I'm glad that you brought up the scene with the priest. Was it vicar?
Vicar.
Does that just mean priest? I didn't research
he's
that
the
before.
religious man.
Oh, okay. But yeah, where he kind of like, he asks when she lost virginity, and it again becomes this scene about sexualizing her, and he's blaming her for having these feelings. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think this whole movie just all circles back to this trauma that she had with her former husband, where he's blaming her for everything. He's the victim in every situation. Like, he's going to kill himself because she wants a divorce, and he wants to hang all this guilt and all this pressure on her. So that's why, again, I just think all the movie ties back into that. And that's why the movie isn't really about her, because it's all about all the crappy things that men do.
Yeah. And I think that's perfectly exemplified by the idea of her eating an apple from the tree, just like Eve of Adam and Eve fame.
That Eve, not of like, not the other one.
Yes,
Right.
The Book of Genesis, authored by Moses. Yes,
Yeah,
that
exactly. But it's a character that has been, over the centuries, been used by certain religious sects as blaming women for allowing sin into the world. It's the same idea as Pandora's box. Like, women are the conduit that evil and sin enter into the world, and they've done this to us. Even though, like, Adam didn't need to eat the apple, he was given it to him by Eve, but somehow he's less responsible. Because
he wasn't first, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So there was some subtlety there, and then Jeffrey was like, "Oh, mustn't do that, even forbidden fruit and all," and then makes a silly joke, and so like we know it's very obvious, like, okay, that's what the point of this movie is, and then they just keep hammering it home on top of that. So yeah, I agree. Like that's definitely what's going on. It's just different iterations. It's the boy, calling her a bitch because he won't play with him.
Yeah.
The vicar who has all of these sexual thoughts.
She's singing to him.
Well, yeah, and then earlier he blames her too. He's like, "What did you do to drive him to that?"
Yeah, like
it's her fault.
Did you let him say sorry? Did you let him apologize?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the story of our
again. The bartender's the only one who isn't blaming her for anything.
Yeah, and everyone else is either following her or running at her, giving her really weird looks.
He's never like,
weird looks. Wait, I read that. I read a line that was like, for now, like they did, like, what is this movie is about? Like, we're not sure. We're not sure what it's about. But for now, it is striking because it shows audience a basic fear: men making weird faces.
Yeah. That's a good way to capture the essence of the movie.
Yeah, it's very weird.
Yeah, and definitely.
So I want to move into the birds, which is, I feel like that's what this movie is going to get talked about, which is kind of why we want to save it for the end. So hopefully you stayed on board for our more boring conversation about aesthetic and pacing. And now we're going to get to the birthing.
The explained part.
Yes. So Calvin, what's your theory on what does the birthing mean?
Okay, so yeah, like I say explain, but this is really mansplaining here.
Yes.
I guess we should also mention the fact that, like, when she stabs him, it's an important visual motif. Kind of. It's one of the motifs that are important, but there's so many of them that none of them are really all that important. Mm-hmm. It's just super gruesome. But it's like, yeah, she stabs him because she is reacting to an advance out of what he's doing. But he then pulls his arm back through the letter opening and cuts his arm in half. It's wild.
Yeah,
it's
he
so
has weird
cool.
hand.
The Green Man.
Yeah, exactly. It's so cool to watch. And but like, yeah, I say, like, look, you did this to me.
Yeah.
I think that
Which is exactly how her husband was speared. as
Yeah,
well.
exactly.
Yeah, when they showed it was like the longest pan down of his body. I was like, all this is going to mean something later.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was like, I was like, okay, maybe this is like religious. Like, oh, look, like how he's strung up, like he's crucified as if he was Jesus.
I sort of
like,
thought that too.
And
then
there was going to be some more victim blaming, like, yeah, you killed him, just like the Jews, am I right? And like,
Yeah.
and of course, this would have
remember
taken a very-
women that time you killed Jesus.
Wait,
Not only did you bring sin into this world,
you had sex with Jesus. Sorry. And then you murdered him.
But I thought that was going to be what it was too. I was like, if you're showing all these wounds on this guy, it's gonna mean something later. That was
Yeah.
pretty overt.
yeah. So I thought, yeah, the cutting of the hand, I was like, okay, maybe this ties it back into like some sort of Christ symbol, or it is just James. And then when he walks into the garden again after crashing the car, and his foot just randomly breaks, like, my God, man, you could just like. You couldn't figure out a way to organically work this in.
I thought it was because he had been hit by the car.
Yeah,
And
me
it just
too.
his ankle finally gave out at that point. I don't
Yeah.
think he was just walking and then it broke.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
got hit by a car,
Yeah, he did get
Calvin.
He didn't get hit by a car.
Yeah, he did.
Oh yeah, I
He
suppose,
goes
yeah.
like,
He gets hit by the car, but like he.
What do
seemed
they
like
say?
fine. He
Ass
was
over
trying-
tea kettle? Because we're talking about the Brits here.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never
Ass
heard
over
that.
tea
I've heard people say that. But yeah, no, he gets a red.
But that again, it's just like it's sensationalism of the subtlety of what that the bodily injury could have meant. But then the idea of the births begin, and I think it's interesting here that it's men birthing men specifically. So I would say that there are two interpretations of this. That it's a primordial thing, starting with something with Adam and Eve, down to the green man, down to the boy, down to the vicar, down to Jeffrey, and gets passed on to her husband James, as something that just exists innately in all men because of how God designed them. I think that's the way that you can look at that, because that's why they all have the same wound after getting rebirthed. Every time they're still broken and hurt. I think the other way of saying this, though, is that in a patriarchal system, the only people hurting men are other men. So you're constantly passing down those negative and hurt traits onto your next generation. And they still hold all of these ideas like, oh, it's women. Women are the ones that are holding me down, keeping me back. When really it's just men telling you like, no, this is the way it is, man. Like, and that's why it's significant that it's men birthing men, because it's these ideas and concepts that get passed down as a social thing rather than existing innately. So I think that's the dichotomy that the birthing works in. Is it's either something that we pass down by our interactions with other people, or it's just innate to all men.
Okay, no, I get that.
What do you think about like the birth hole migrating from below the genitals to like the spine to like the mouth? I don't know where the second one was though.
It was
I think they're both.
yeah.
You get two.
The first two are out of.
You get two vaginal births normally,
Yeah.
if you can say that,
Yeah.
and then you get one shoulder blade birth.
Yeah.
And then one
From the blowhole.
I just thought it was like it didn't matter. It was just supposed to show that this is going to be reoccurring. It doesn't
supposed to
matter
be-
where it's come
just,
from.
And I think at that point he was like, let's just make it as crazy as we can.
Yeah. That
Have
might
a-
have
And then you have
been
a
true.
mouth
Yeah.
birth. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
and-
might have just been like, yeah, let's get it.
And we're like, feet first, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, yeah, that's it. I think that's at the point where the metaphor is
But-
like let's just keep making it sensational.
But
Yes.
also the only one born feet first was her husband.
No, I actually that's where my
Like,
theory comes from is
It's like the
why it
reverse
changes.
birth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Before we go on, I do want to say I did a quick in-podcast research. Ass Over Tea Kettle comes from Richard John's Pagany Volume 3, released in 1932. And the line is, well, you're lucky. If I was him, I would have fired you, ass over tea kettle.
Oh, that's where it's from.
Yes. I didn't make it up. I knew I'd heard it.
From 1938.
I really, this really changes whether I think of you as a source of information or not.
I'm just saying I didn't make it up. I knew I had heard it.
I trust more what you say now.
Thank you. So my theory on what the birthing means and why it's repeating the same person being birthed over and over again is like she's in this cycle where she views men the same way no matter what. Like they're all out to get her. They're all out to make themselves the victim, and they're all going to blame her for everything. She feels guilty. And the fact that it just keeps repeating to me, because I also think this movie is like entirely psychological, is this is a process happening in her mind. And then when her husband is finally born, she's finally confronted with him. That's when she gets the chance to move on. It's like, instead of making it, I'm mad at all men, or I think all men are this way, she finally gets to the root of the problem and is like, well, the reason I view it this way is because of this initial trauma with my former husband. Once that cycle stops and she's able to kind of, I think, get a grip on herself, like she gets the axe so she can feel like safe. And that's
Which
when...
is a phallus.
Oh.
Yes, of course. And that's when like kind of the whole mood of that, it becomes much less gruesome body horror, and it's just this kind of final confrontation that she has with her husband.
Yeah.
And so that's what I think it's about. It's her breaking away from this cycle she's been going through over and over in her head. It's her confronting this guilt. It's her realizing that he wasn't the victim. It's her realizing that she's not responsible for this. And I think she feels guilty, but I don't think she feels at fault, which I think the movie does a good job of portraying that. I don't think she goes through this movie like, I drove him to kill himself. She certainly doesn't, especially with her interaction with the priest.
Yeah.
But that was my thought, is it was finally the breaking of this cycle. But they're not all the same person. They're not all this trauma. It's finally, she can move on from that and realize like, okay, I can move past this point in my life now. That's why I thought it was interesting. Like the cycle finally changed, and it was like, the problem isn't all men. The problem was this one man in her life. And when she finally gets to go like toe to toe with that for a minute, that's when like this character evolves and moves past it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember, was she wearing her necklace from the very beginning until the very end? It's really important to me.
Oh boy, no, I don't. That's like a deep cut.
When did she get it?
I don't know, because like I feel like I very clearly at one point was like, because with her getting her resolution with her husband, I'm like, did she, like, what happened, like what really happened there to make her move on? Like nothing happened. She just got bombarded over and over and over again, and then was like numb, and then like was like, okay.
Well, I think
You
the
just
point
wanted
was
this.
that because she asks, "What do you want from me?"
Yeah.
And then the point was, it's not about her. It's not about
Yeah.
what he wanted from her.
Just
It was just
wanted
about
love.
like, this person is just. I hate to say, I'm going to say just he's toxic. And we'll talk about toxic masculinity in a little bit, but
You're no longer a trusted source of authority.
But I think that was the point, is it wasn't about what he wanted from her. It was like he was always going to be this way, or he had always been this way.
Yeah.
And it was about her making that realization, like, well, it's not about me. It's like, I just need to move past this tough, terrible part of my life. Mm-hmm. And that's what I took from it.
I'm trying to get
It's I think it's hard to interpret 4 male births in a movie.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're doing our best,
One would
but
have
I
been
think it's tough.
challenging.
Well, it's super tough. Yeah, and I'm just like, I wonder if her necklace means as a symbol of her grief. I think there was a lot of grief and trauma. Like, like you said, there were so many symbols that you could pick on, so many, but none of them seemed like they meant that much.
Okay, does this movie become better or worse if Alexander Garland comes out and tells you what the meaning of the movie was, or at least what the birthing scene meant? Or is this movie stay better if you get to have your own interpretation, hear other people's interpretations, and kind of make this movie your own in some ways? Because I think there are movies where the director comes out and says, oh, no, this is what that scene meant, or this is what the ending meant. And then that's like canon now. And so you can never view that movie the same way. You're like, oh, well, all my cool ideas don't matter because the director or the writer said, this is how it is.
Yeah.
For me, it doesn't change necessarily how I view it. That can be intent, and then I judge how I receive it based on that intent. I think there's I enjoy it a little bit more because then I can see like, okay, well, you just missed the mark. Like we've talked about Guillermo del Toro and Pan's Labyrinth, and how he thought that, everything was real. Like, I totally disagree. Because that's not the movie he made, and it's fun to talk about because he's just very wrong about his own movie.
Yeah.
But I don't think it changes. If anything, it would help this make more sense. Everything else is so obvious until you get to that part, and you're just like, or okay, one birth, okay, it's the same guy. Oh my God, there's going to be more, aren't there? And then you're just like, you don't really understand why. I'm inventing all of those things. Are they all like, is it all bullshit what I said? Quite possibly. Like I'm just, I'm grasping at straws because nothing else, everything else about this was just, it was like you were hit over the head with a bat over and over. And the thing is once you get there, like, it should be super obvious then, and it's all about the process of getting to the super obvious thing. So you have this idea of healing and rebirth, and that's clear in like a lot of other things. And then you get to this, and it's birth over and over, and it kind of turns those images on its head. That idea of like, if it's rebirth and it's new beginning for her, then what the hell is going on here? I wouldn't mind if he just came out and told us what it is, because it would make it a little bit more accessible. And it's really more about the journey than it is about being confusing.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Katya? Or
I think I want to know. Because I do agree with you, Connor, in the sense that I really dislike when they're just like, well, we thought it looked so cool. Or like, I had a pony as a child. That's why there was a horse at the end.
That would really fucking piss me off.
Yeah, like
if at the end he was like, I just wanted to make a gratuitous scene, I'd be like, fuck you.
Or like you said,
that
like
sucks.
we already generated this once, we might as well use it a couple more times.
Yeah, we needed to fill the whole hour and 40 minutes, and so we thought, what better way?
I don't think that's like a likely answer.
I just hate it. It'd be like, well, the vaginal birth budget was already approved, so we had to use it up. Otherwise, the comptroller would reduce our budget next time. I hate that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I want to have at least some hints or as to what it might be, like Calvin said, to know if everything kind of clicks into place then. But I guess it depends, because I'm also the person that likes just assuming whatever I want to about a movie, and then I remember it that way forever, and it becomes that for me. However, I run into trouble because I do the same thing like with song lyrics, and when I'm trying to connect with people later on, they're just like, that was not how the song went, and that is not the same movie that we watched.
Right. And I think that's like, it's one thing that we've talked about before, both with Jordan Peele talking about Get Out and how the girl is eating the Fruit Loops.
Yeah.
And I don't think I've told you this before, Katya, but someone asks, in Get Out, the girl has a bowl of milk and her Fruit Loops, and they're in two separate bowls, and so she takes them out and dips them in the milk, if I remember right. I think that's the case. Or either that, or like she's just eating them dry and like drinking milk. It's one of those things. But someone was like, asked a question to Jordan Peele, the director, and they were like, yeah, that's because, she's keeping the colors separate from the whites, right? And he was like, no, it's just because she's fucking weird. Yeah. But then there you have, on the opposite end of that, you have, or I think in the middle, you have Robert Eggers, who admits, like, I have an idea of how I want things to be, but there's a certain level of ambiguity that I like to build into my films, because it's going to mean everything to everybody. It can mean so many different things to the same person at different points in their life, on different days even, or even different periods within a day. So I think there's an understanding that even if it's the way you design it, it's not always going to be received that way. So understanding all of its implications and just giving you like hints and clues about what you meant, I think is more fun. And I think that shows a level of intelligence that you don't see in a lot of directors. I don't find it in Alex Garland.
You hate this guy.
I don't hate him. I just like, I don't like feeling like I'm treating like a child, like by the director, like, oh man, you might be pretty stupid. So I'm going to make sure
you make fun
that,
of me by proxy, because I'm like, oh, I love this director.
No, but I mean, like, it's the same thing. Like with
problem.
But I love Mother. I love Darren Aronofsky. There's nothing subtle about Darren Aronofsky.
Yeah, where do you draw the line? What is?
I don't know why Mother really works for me, and why this does. I mean, I don't like Noah.
And then that
like,
surprises me too. Is like, why do I find his other movies so interesting? And then I watched Mother, and I was like, I hate this. I've come around to it more, but I was like, it's so obvious. But then all of his other, like Alexander Garland's movies, are pretty obvious. So it's like, why do I don't know why. I think it's all in visual style is why I find one more pleasing than the other.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we're talking about. It's just the way certain representations of art resonate with individuals.
Right.
And I just Alex's just aren't there for me.
Not your guy.
Last question then. What did she kill at the end?
Oh wait, when?
So when Riley pulls up
Yeah.
and the Fiesta is crashed
Yeah.
and the door is open and there's a trail of amniotic fluid, but it could be blood. It's implying that it's all real.
This
So
is the
Yeah.
trouble I had with, because my whole theory of it all just being in her head.
Yeah.
This is where it kind of falls apart, and it frustrated me because the movie just cuts to like it looks like a title screen, like it looks like the end credit scene. It just flashes men up on the screen, and I was like, cool, perfect end. Like my whole theory totally makes sense now. And then of course it continues on to the scene that you mentioned, which makes it all seem real. And I still think it functions either way. I think if you want it to all actually happen and some entity she interacted with caused all this and she actually went through this, I think it works that way. I also think you could just feel like she had a mental breakdown and caused a mess in the house. I think that she was driving away and she had this like realization and stopped and realized, oh, I can't drive away from this problem. I can't run away from this problem. I need to go back and like confront this, which leads to like the birthing scene and the ultimate like confrontation with her former husband. So I think it works either way. It makes my idea not work as well. So it's unfortunate that
Yeah.
I really hitched my wagon to that horse. And then the final scene of the movie kind of undoes a lot of that.
Because yeah, it could have been her own blood and her own like major freak out.
yeah,
Could have been
exactly.
the deer. She could have killed that deer.
Yeah, that could be. I think that's probably the deer from Annihilation, though.
Well,
Or
it would
sh-
have come back as some cool
Yeah.
floral deer with like amazing vine antlers.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. Like maybe that's the Green Man from
Yeah.
the. It's all connected, man.
Yeah.
Annihilation, Ex Machina. He's gonna be the next Quentin Tarantino that will be a little bit less smart than Quentin Tarantino, but like given
Which is
over to,
like really saying something because Quentin Tarantino's movies aren't smart.
no, they're just they're very well executed, simple ideas.
Yeah, I would never describe him as and this is not a knock, not a smart director. At least he's not.
He's a clever director.
That makes
and
it sound
not-
like I'm saying
Yeah.
he's not smart or
Yeah.
he's dumb. Just that's not the kind of movie he's making. It's not a thinker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The most intriguing question anyone has about his movies is what's in the briefcase.
Yeah, exactly. And that he built a whole career on that.
Right. That's so wild.
One other question then: does it matter, or what is the significance of Riley being pregnant when she shows up?
Dude, I wondered if that meant something.
Yeah.
But it was already at the end. And I felt like I had seen too much pregnancies already.
That's when I was like,
So I was like, enough is enough.
okay, so that's when I was like, because we just watched a bunch of abortion stuff. That's when I was like, oh, this woman, Harper, is pregnant with her dead husband's baby and has realized, and like I was like, oh, I bet she had an abort. She got into a car crash to kill the baby. And then,
Whoa, what
and
the
then
fuck?
Riley,
Wow.
and then Riley shows up, and you're like, oh, she has a baby, because then Harper's like all like really happy and chill. I
thought-
don't know. Like that's when I'm like, but I think it was just a.
No, I think that's
I thought
actually
I had a
really-
weird take, but
I
that
think
was
that's actually a really interesting take, because it makes a lot of sense. Because there's the amniotic fluid, there's the idea of something being born into James again, and why she feels okay now. And I think that's like it's all rolled up together into. I think it works well with your idea, Connor, that it all being mental, which is why she's seeing this thing with this guilt and all of this pregnancy. It's all the things that are bubbling up inside of her, and they just get formed up into the Green Man, which is feeding off of her and showing her this is what's going on inside of your mind. Look at how gross it is. Deal with it. And so she chops his dick off and makes him choke on it. It's weird that they didn't show that.
right.
Wait, did she do that?
That's what Riley said. She was like,
Oh,
take that
yeah,
axe
Riley
behind
was
him,
gonna do it, yeah.
chop his dick off, and make him choke on it.
Yeah, it was also just interesting that Riley seemed like just this bad bitch, and then she shows up and she's just this super, super pregnant woman. And I think maybe another just simple thing, it just like changes how you feel about her, like almost
Yeah.
instantaneously.
Yeah.
And how you feel about their relationship and what's going to happen moving forward.
Yeah, I tried to ascribe some meaning to it, but I was mostly just like, well, he's been repeating images a lot in this movie.
It's just repeated.
It's just a repeat. And if,
Yeah.
if that's all it is, that's fine with me because, but that threw me off at the end. I was like, are you
Yeah.
kidding me? Like,
Also, she was like super pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should stay at home.
Yeah, she was about ready to pop right there in the garden to
Yeah.
continue the motif.
Well, but then
So,
that
who knows?
like makes her seem like this really awesome friend. She's like, I'm making the drive right now. I'll make it in
Yeah.
3 hours instead of 4. And she's
Yeah.
like crazy pregnant. So it like builds lore around this character. Now, so
Yeah.
it's cool in that way.
Yeah, speaking of men too, Riley in her own movie, her spin-off.
Maybe Riley is trans.
Okay.
She gives birth to James.
What if the baby was
we're
James's?
getting
What
way
if
too
she had
lost.
been? What if she had an affair and the baby is James's child?
Oh my gosh, now we're so off topic, but that is like
Pull back.
another level of maybe Alex Garland isn't so stupid.
Men to the reckoning.
James versus James Jr.
Oh boy.
Oh gosh. Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so I just kind of, this is like a little softball one, but on a scale of 1 to 10, forbidden fruits.
You're gonna say dicks.
Isn't that the same thing?
Yeah. Okay.
Katya, what do you give
1 to
this
10
one?
apples.
Forbidden fruit.
Forbidden
specifically.
fruit.
Oh,
It's classically represented as an apple, but nobody knows.
it probably was a pomegranate.
Well, I feel like the apple industry hates that it's always depicted as an apple. I'm like, God damn it. The same way Corona was probably like when it got called the coronavirus. They're like,
Yeah.
what the fuck?
Their sales actually dipped pretty hard.
I read
Yeah.
that there was like a petition to change it to the Bud Light virus that they had like sponsored and stuff. It's pretty funny.
Oh, okay, got it. I want to say 8, but that's kind of high. But I'll say 8 forbidden fruits.
Okay.
One of them might be a little smaller than the rest.
Right. Has a bite out of it.
Yeah.
Like a decimal point? Is that what you're implying?
Yeah, like a 7.9.
Calvin, what do you think of this one?
Yeah. So I pose to you this question. Do you think it is smart to run out into the street and take a baseball bat and smash a person's head over and over, yelling, "Do you get it?" Do you think that's smart?
It's might be justified.
But is it?
Do we deserve it as
but
the
is it-
audience?
but
Do
is
we?
it-
But do we deserve to be
But is it
eaten
smart?
I think
that
there's
many times?
That's the thing.
I
It's
think
like
there's a situation where it happens, but when I pay to sit down and have that happen to me, that's where I have a problem with it.
See, I think of this as a metaphorical manslaughter of my mind, and I think it's like a
Jesus.
6. It's like a 6.2. Like I get it, man. Like you don't need to like.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that too high for you?
No, I'm actually, it's higher than I thought you were going to put it.
Yeah, it's.
You were more critical of anyone I thought of this.
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's a third that really saves it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I
so
believe that.
a 9 of a third, and then 3, and then 2 3s of thirds, really averages out. I
Yeah.
think it's just a strong. It's just a strong first third.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I felt assaulted, and that's the way that.
For me, this was just, it was boring visually for a lot of it. I don't mind a slow pace to a movie. And I felt like it at least was like setting itself up for like a good climax. And I think you got that visually. You didn't really get it in a physical or visceral way. It was just the chance to view gore in a very strange way. And so I think at least the buildup felt like it did something and it happened and it mattered at the end. But I just thought this movie, of the 3 he's done, I would make this it's the worst that he's put out.
That's weird because this is definitely the best that he's done.
Oh man.
I mean, maybe
That's what I'm saying. It's just like personal preference.
Yeah,
on it.
maybe you go back and watch. It's been 8 years since I've seen Ex Machina, but I just remember it being good and not transcendent.
Yeah, I watched this at like 11. I watched Men at 11 in theaters, and then I came back home and like immediately put Annihilation on while I was like typing up notes for Men. And then I had enough time before you guys came over, so I threw Ex Machina on, and I was watching both of them. I was like, God damn, these are so much better. But that's fine. Yeah, and I just think aesthetic mattered a lot to me in this movie, and I just thought it was kind of visually boring. And it didn't matter that you had the creepiest scene that he's made out of the 3.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't redeem itself enough to like achieve, I thought, the heights he had done with Ex Machina and Annihilation. Again, I think it's a fine movie. Certainly not for everyone. I think this is a movie that's really going to hit its stride when it is streaming, and it's not going to be a very big theater hit.
Yeah, I don't. Judging by the reviews on IMDb, a lot of people are pissed who haven't even seen it.
how can you be mad about a movie you haven't seen?
Yeah, exactly. Because it's social justice, and it's like it's all about just leftism and like wanting to stay relevant. Like, men are gross, and this is the future that liberals see is erasing white men and the jealousy that women have for white men.
Well, speaking of comments, we're going to have a little bonus episode where we're going to go through like comments and other reviews and maybe a couple articles that we found on this film, because I think this film is like strange enough that people are going to have some really hot takes on this one. So we're going to read a couple, give our opinion on them. So stay tuned. We're going to have that bonus episode up. Something we haven't done yet. I'm kind of excited to try out. But with that, Calvin, thanks for being on as always.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And Katya, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And you can find our podcast on any platform like Apple Music or Spotify. We also upload all these to YouTube, so go ahead and leave a comment. Tell us what we're doing well. Tell us what we're doing wrong. And with that, thank you for listening to Now This Is Podcasting.